Welcome, everyone. Hi, I'm Juliet Palmer. I'm the president of the board of the Canadian New Music Network. I'm originally from Aotearoa, New Zealand, but I now make my home in Te Toronto, which is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit River, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. CNMN brings together music and sound creators, producers, performers, educators, and listeners, offering resources and opportunities for mutual exchange and learning. We're based in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, on unceded Indigenous land of which the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation are the recognized custodians. CNMN's membership spans the territories of the many nations of Turtle Island. Tonight, we present the fourth in our Decolonization Conversation series, and we're very grateful for the support of the Canadian New Music Centre and the Canadian League of Composers. Our discussion, We Can't Play Their Game, Their Way, is curated and led by composer and new media artist Remy Siu. And joining Remy tonight, we're delighted to welcome four extraordinary multidisciplinary artists who really are making their own way. Gabrielle Dharmoo, Melody McKiver, Nancy Tam, and Leslie Ting. I hand it over to you, Remy. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll just quickly go over the format of the panel. I'm going to give an opening statement, and then I'm going to ask panelists questions that we'll discuss. And then after that, the panelists will have an opportunity to ask the audience questions. This will be more like we'll leave these questions with the audience. I don't think we can do a kind of like back and forth thing over chat. And then we'll open to questions from the audience if we have time. So I'm going to read my opening statement now. Today, we've gathered four artists to discuss their experiences interfacing with the larger structure of new music and its eurocentric priorities. There was another talk in this series called, quote unquote, Can Western art music ever be equitable in practice and in perception? And I think that's a great question. And my first thought was, no, it can't. And that's kind of where I want to start from. A lot of other talks that I've been involved in before kind of assumes an inherent goodness to this process structure of new music. You know, and time again, it's mentioned as something that's worth saving in one way or another. A lot of these discussions involve the new music world trying to involve other folks who have been excluded with an assumption that the only thing they need to do is include those previously excluded without changing anything about itself or its process. I want to start from a place also where we acknowledge that maybe those people who have been excluded for so long do not want in on this thing. If we cannot fundamentally change the processes, materials, and outputs of new music, if we can't give ground, we can't expect them to want to participate in what we now know as new music. I also want to start from a place where we don't assume that new music or Western classical music does good in the world, but rather how we can mitigate damage and repair relationships as this structure has been perpetuating white supremacy and exclusionary practices for a very long time. So can anything be achieved without fundamentally rearranging or removing the processes, materials, and or methods of distribution that currently define the dominant practices in new music? And can we move forward without confronting the possibility that new music and classical music in its practice and pedagogy does more harm than good? So I'm going to get maybe everybody to introduce themselves. Maybe I'll start with Nancy and then Melody.
Okay. Hello, my name is Nancy Tam, and I make sounds and performance in very many ways, written and not, on stage, in situ, at site, in all sorts of ways. I was trained as a composer and improviser and moved on from there. I will say that much for now, I think. Thanks.
Bushu, Megwayanakwat, Indigo, Ubishikokong and Donji, Wananawangang and the Da, Mashkade Bijake and Dodem, on Shinabe Nawe Ogwabe and Dao, Basic Bade. Hi everyone, my name's McKiver. I'm a member of Lac Seul First Nation. I am speaking today in Sioux Lookout, which is part of Treaty 3 territory. It's where my ancestors have lived since the last ice age. I'm part of the Buffalo Clan and I'm a musician and composer. Thanks for having me today.
Gabrielle, maybe?
Sure. Hi, I'm Gabrielle Dharmoo. I'm a composer, but a decreasing composer, an increasing interdisciplinary artist, drag artist, and vocal improviser, experimental improviser. I'm based in Montreal, Tiohtià:ke, and thank you, Remy and CNN and co-panelists. Why am I pretending this is ending?
Hi everyone, my name is Leslie Ting. I'm a violinist and a creator, performer, producer of, I suppose multidisciplinary works. They tend in particular to combine with theater right now anyway. And so I find myself using classical and new music as a vehicle for other concepts and ways of connecting. And I have a background before that in optometry, and I find that really informing my practice in ways of connecting with people. I'll stop there.
Thanks. I want to start maybe then with the question that something that we can talk about, something that we discussed, like was brought up in our preliminary discussion in December that we had, was that we can't play their game their way. So, what does this mean to you, and how did you kind of come to realize this? Maybe I can start again with Nancy this time.
I think that was like fairly apparent from like the beginning. Like when I went to music school, it was like there weren't, or maybe it was like the particular program that I was in, or but even just that statement itself, it's an interesting one that we have to like kind of specify in these ways of like what time and when and all. But it was fairly apparent that I didn't really have that many role models that looked like me, um, or were doing things that like I thought like, oh yeah, for sure, this is the kind of work that I want to make. So it didn't really impress upon me that if I were to just like be a classical musician or a classical composer, that I would succeed. So I gave up on that kind of from the get, and I knew that I needed to do something else. So, yeah.
Maybe I can move to Melody again.
Sure, and fundamentally, just as I'm having this conversation in English, for me, classical music education is because like we're talking about decolonization and thinking of Audre Lorde, like the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. So for me as a musician, I recognize that this is a tradition that has been oppressive of my people, where Canadian classical music especially thrives on like the explicit theft of Indigenous songs, the theft of Indigenous stories. So for me to be located in this place is both complicit and destabilizing. And I recognize that my place within new music communities is one of relative privilege and access, where though I'm definitely marginalized in a number of levels broadly as an Indigenous person, it's a place where I'm not rushing in the same way to throw open the door and encourage more of my peers of a younger generation to come through. Because as someone who's a classical strings player, when people ask me how much I expect to pay for a violin to go to music school, like I'm embarrassed to tell them, because we know as many concert trained musicians that we're talking tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to be viewed as performing on a level playing field at the professional level, and that's after 10 plus years of private instruction to make it to the university level, and then to be a regularly programmed composer or classical performer in Canada, you need bare minimum a master's degree. So we're working with so many inherent forms of both structural racism, structural classism, and how those intersect, that it's inherently a pretty toxic playing field, and it feels like a fluke that I ended up back in this space, and it's just because that's the language that I was dealt, the tools I was given as a young person, that I decided to pursue further.
Gabrielle?
I would say that I see it as there's different games, board games or types of games that are simultaneously kind of stacked, one on top of the other. So I don't want to be too simplistic in how I answer it, but a simplistic answer thing that I can acknowledge is I've played the game for a while, like with the rules of what is expected of conservatory trained people that started on an instrument and then went to composition, and then were seeking collaboration or commissions with peers, and that seemed like the thing to do. But I've always had a parallel strand to my practice that felt more free and more playful and less attached to that world. So for me, it's always been, well, the game is juggling. Basically, I've always was always interested in doing the different things, but more and more as I navigate the scene, more and more I see the game as something with rules that can be bent, but I'm less and less what's the word, volunteer in the, like, I don't want to play I don't seek any commissions. If they come, it's because I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm much more interested in using my background to create things that feel true to the different parts of my identity, and that I would feel comfortable inviting people I want to engage to these events. So, like, who is attending the things is very important to me, more and more. So I'm trying to always keep that in mind, and that's kind of how my practice has shaped in the past, I'd say 7 or 8 years, and it goes in one direction. I'm not seeking the stuff I've done before, if that makes sense.
I'd like to just continue off of what Gab just said about who's in the room. Something that I've been thinking and kind of struggling with, frankly, lately in my current practice, and the theater companies I'm working with are, one question that I've been asked a lot is, what do you want people to walk away with from your performance or your show? And it's a great question, and actually, like, pretty basic, but I had never, it's not in the air in classical and new music. I just never heard anybody ask or think about this question. And even though it's a basic question, it's really, I mean, it points to a lot of issues right away, like who's in the audience? Are you seeing who's in the room? Are you making the room welcoming for those people? Even basics of access. I guess, like, I think that question has really shown me part of the reason I don't play the game anymore. And I'll say too that I also have had a lot of privilege in my life to be able to play the game, and worked very hard to play the game, something I really wanted, and certainly, you know, I guess to feel like I shudder a little bit when I think about sort of this, how much when I think about even just the orchestra audition process of trying to be approved by a panel of mostly white people to join this team. When I think about it in the way of like the way it represents, you know, the white supremacist structures, it feels, I mean, you know, I sort of feel like I'm that in that Matrix scene where I'm suddenly be like waking up and sort of seeing exactly where I live and exactly what's been going on, and that is very like destabilizing. Like Melody said, it's been destabilizing, and it's really hard to absorb. And whatever privilege I have now, I guess I try, which I mean in terms of time and resource, and I try to make sure that wherever my power is, as far as hiring and engaging and people, collaborators, audience, that I spend time doing that because I am able to now. Whereas when I was playing the game and I was sort of upholding all of the things, I had no agency. And I was actually really, I don't know if anybody listens to the podcast Canada Land, but there was this episode in the summertime. I looked it up again actually for this panel. It's episode 339, and it was about the Toronto Star hiring an internal ombudsman for anybody who was marginalized, who needed to like bring up issues in the media, in their media, and like reporting of stories, and but needed to talk to someone who I guess might, you know, might not listen to them, or if they felt there'd be repercussions. And it was a woman named Shri Paradkar. I hope I'm probably not pronouncing her last name correctly, but she talked about, I mean, Jesse Brown, the host, was asking about like, okay, so what's your power here? Do you have power to, if someone complains about a thing, do you have power to pull the story? And she was like, oh, that's interesting that you go somewhere like power. Like, I'm not interested in like power. I'm talking about shared power. And that's, you know, maybe authority is a better word than power. And I would think about that a lot as far as when I feel like there's a resistance, or I mean, I think the resistance to the game being taken down, the structures being taken down, like when it's obvious, we don't need to talk about that. But I think what I find more troubling is the sort of passivity or the sort of like shrugging feeling I get from some people that who are in those positions of like tenured, unionized positions, I'll just say it, that they don't need to do anything because they're already in these places of security they're already in, and they don't like, oh, well, like, I guess that's how it is kind of the feeling I have. And I think that's really, for me, I find that kind of like baffling and very quite overwhelming when I think about what can be done.
I think panelists can jump in also if they still want to continue this thread. If not, I have another question, but I don't want to. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask the other question. I was looking at everybody's websites and I was like, oh, you're all way better musicians than I am. I part of it, I like, that being said, it's like everybody has some form of instrument that they carry in one way or another, or like have usually started with. And I just wanted to kind of maybe hear you talk about how that relationship with that instrument is developed over time, like the relationship with the object itself, and sometimes how the priorities are built into the object itself, and like how that has kind of changed with your thinking over your practice. Maybe we can start with Melody.
Oh boy. Yeah, I think I think once I became really passionate about pursuing music more seriously, it was through the lens of a multi-instrumentalist. I started as a violinist at a young age, but really until high school was more interested in hockey than violin, and especially in Ottawa, which has quite a competitive young classical music scene. Like if you're not meeting X threshold and studying with uh, Y teacher and donating Z amount of money to the Youth Orchestra Academy and having your parents offer in all sorts of indentured labor, it's going to handicap you quite quickly in terms of those circles. So I was a somewhat remedial violin student that got into 1 out of 3 of the universities I applied and auditioned for, and was like quite berated and insulted as an older teenager in many of my auditioning processes. So I started my professional training with a bit of emotional baggage and trauma from just like experiencing that gatekeeping, that classism, that racism, and as someone that was pretty raised middle class, like I work, being an Indigenous person living in Northern Ontario, like I view and work with people living in poverty every day, and that's never been my experience. That's what's allowed me to have a music education is by not living in poverty, but um, definitely uh, moving from violin to viola is consistently a class where my undergrad teacher was like, I remember her saying like, "You, oh, that's just an old fiddle you're playing. Like you should really get something better." And of course, something better is something that costs like $50,000, which I just didn't have kicking around, unfortunately. And so it kind of quickly tempered like these unspoken set of expectations where I'm like, I'm too far behind. Like I shouldn't do a graduate degree in performance, which I think was ultimately my goal. And so I went the musicology route, and then it became a running joke of like, oh, like like a significant majority of ethnomusicologists are violists. So you've got like the viola jokes and like the failed violinist jokes, and then the failed violist went to ethnomusicology jokes, and all these sort of uh, parameters built into music education and like the elitism of the classical strings era, world. And so much of my career trajectory since then has been finding a balance with acknowledging my relationship to the instrument, and like that kind of parameter of learning the rules so you can break them. And I didn't only break the rules, I broke my shoulder at the end of my undergrad, so that further put me back in terms of orchestral playing, and like more high level chamber music performance, which is something that I still really enjoy and find value in. But to this, like 10 years after my injury, like I'm still in physiotherapy. I'm investigating surgery, so like it's we have to examine like physical ableism as well, because a bike accident stopped me from pursuing strings performance at the level that I wanted to, and still in many ways aspire to as a goal for myself. Even though I think I've managed to shed most of the emotional baggage going along with whether or not I can play the Tchaikovsky violin concerto or the Bartok viola. Like that's not my end target at this point, like it would have been like when I was 19 years old. But that led me into finding other spaces where working with electronics, starting to compose, to improvise. It was an escape route where you recognize, okay, so your parent needs to be a doctor that's willing to put down $50,000 on like a high-end professional instrument to become an orchestral soloist or get one of those full-time orchestra jobs, and I knew that wasn't an option, so you had to make something else.
Thanks. Uh, Leslie.
Are there any violinists who don't have baggage out there? Because I'd really like to meet you. Um, but I went back to school, like I said, like after I was a practicing optometrist, and um, oh boy, like how much time do we have if we're gonna really get into this? But going back to school as like an older student in violin is like pretty tricky. Um, there's so much like ageism, like, and I don't know if the whole child prodigy thing is still like a fixation in like the world of classical music so much. I'm sort of like, but I mean, you know, I know there is like a, you know, a nervous system and like practice. Like I definitely missed a lot of those like key, let's say, key years in your like late teens and early 20s where you really like nail down loads of repertoire and you're like competing and all these things. So coming back, I was really laser focused on catching up and living this like parallel life for many years, and trying to like get that legitimacy of that like competitions and orchestra jobs or whatever. And yeah, I mean, I probably only once I sort of started making multidisciplinary shows that were sort of totally out of the game world, let's say. And that actually wasn't because I was trying to get out of the game. It was for personal reasons. My mother had died, and I was still thinking, you know, in terms of outreach. Like I guess in particular for the low vision and blind community. And so, you know, I guess as far as like my relationship to the violin is still really tied up in ego and really tied up in aspiring and, you know, all those like, all of those, you know, perfectionism. And I have a fraught relationship with recording anything because with recording, there's the possibility of perfection and I just freeze. And I started to notice that anytime I was preparing for an audition, it would actually really make me a very boring player while I tried to fit into what I thought they wanted. And so like ultimately in trying to do this like art form thing that I really love, that had given me a lot of great, you know, younger person memories, the reality of it was that there are a lot of issues that I won't get in. There's just too many to list, too many like, and subtle things too, like lots of subtle political, toxic, you know, like I said, like the sort of more gray area things that are problematic that just start to weigh you down too much. And yeah, like I spent many weeks writing an essay that's on, you know, on Medium about sort of noticing like the unaccidental whiteness of classical music and the people around me and sort of how that was being perpetuated and my own role in it. So the violin is now sort of tied up with all of those things. It's very heavy now. But I think in trying to make other work with the music, the thing is I still think there's a lot of beautiful music and great things there that I'd like to share. And while still trying to respect the composers and the form and all those things, I'm trying to go that extra step, that question I keep getting asked, which is, what do you want people to walk away with? Which I find in classical and new music, it goes about as far as this is the form of the music, or this is the historical context, or this is what I want to say. And then it sort of stops there, and that sort of performer audience, like there's like actually a huge chasm there for me anyway, personally. It's what I started to feel. So I'm currently trying to open up that line. And I'll just finish by saying that I find in this way, and using the instrument and music and collaborating in this way, that I have less ego, and it just makes I can just hear better what sort of the, you know, the work is trying to get me to do.
Gabrielle.
Yeah. So I'll separate it in two, I think, because I'm a vocalist, but the instrument that I started with, and that's tangled with these questions, is the cello, which I started at 9, and then did my my cégep, my college and university, kind of studying in. But I never wanted to be the cellist that plays the concertos or that plays the orchestra. For me, it was kind of always a gateway to music and to getting into those programs. And when I was playing as a kid, it was a, it was like a more like a hobby, like my children are going to learn music and then you do it, but you also have your sport, and then you kind of they kind of coexist for a little bit. But it was never like this kind of conservatory tests every year kind of pressured environment at all. So for me, it stayed kind of this thing, and I never had great ambition in it. And part of it is because I've always seen myself as being a creative musician. I've always had my ambitions go in that direction. So I was kind of a bit of a, not a rebel, but I wouldn't practice as much as I should have, and I was kind of fine with it and sassy about it. So it was a bit, but I did notice just that I liked playing early music and continuo on the cello, and I liked doing contemporary music. But the funny thing with contemporary music, and that's what I'm realizing now, today as we speak, is just how, there's also this gatekeeping of how skilled of a musician you need to be to, I've thought this before, but something just happened, in my brain. So there's this expectation of musicians being the absolute best also as performers. So when you want to be in the composer performer kind of category, there's that extra pressure, unless you just kind of let go of these expectations and transform your practice into something that's meaningful to you and that people will resonate with, because not all audiences are expecting tip-top virtuosity and reading all the rhythms correctly and all that. There's so much more to be appreciated about music. So that's kind of about the cello. And then with the voice, it came the jump from cello to voice came when I was at the conservatoire. There was the improv class that was offered by Remy Siu. It was there just for maybe 2 years, or because improv in schools is always this thing that's available some years and some not, depending on who's the director and if they think it's child play. That's a actual thing that's been said, so I was fortunate because the years I was there turned out good for me. I could do that. And then I remember I had to choose, and I felt like because I was improvising on the cello already, but I was kind of trying to develop this voice thing, and I just thought the directness of the body, and I found myself doing the same things a little bit on the cello, like the ponticello tremolo near the thing that sounds like a B, and then pizzicato, and then tapping. So I felt like a bit limited in what I would do. Whereas with voice, I found that there was such fluidity to what I could bring as a performer. And I have lots more to say about voice, but I don't know. I'll try to keep it kind of wrapped up into these ideas that we're discussing. What I like about vocal improvisation is that with an instrument you have the culture and you have the history, whereas with voice, all cultures use the voice. So there's this kind of there's not what's lutherie in English, the building of an instrument that comes from a tradition of wood making and strings and all that. There's not that whole kind of socio-historical thing as much. But then I have also found out that lots of the extended voice scene goes to I think that abstract sound in voice to me has become very it's I find that there's this thing where anything that goes back to other words that are yeah, because I read the chat and I see word and everything you do as a that's not gonna in improv, you're in free improv that comes from like the European stream. Like the second you refer to some sort of cultural reference, like for years it was kind of frowned upon, and it's not been like that for every scene in every time in every country in every city. There's always nuance to this, but I found that lots of voice becoming abstract became a little bit acultural, but I found that acultural has been more and more like really Eurocentric because of who it engages. So that's why I'm trying to in my vocal work kind of expand, have the different kind of ways of sounding available because they're kind of in the body. There's ethical reasons, but I don't want to get to ethical dimensions to this also, but it's even more complex. So I'll just end.
Nancy.
Yeah, thanks. I guess like just to start, before even thinking about going to music school, I guess like I really actually I wanted to go to theater school. I didn't want to be a composer, or like I didn't even think that was an option for me. In fact, like I remember uh, just growing up playing the piano, practicing so hard, and it was always just like I think this thing about like do it for enjoyment, it was huge. And then it's like, okay, well, you're pretty good at it, so why don't you do that along with like applying for, I don't know, just like a English degree or whatever. It was kind of that. And then of course, I begged to like just have one audition at a theater school because that's what I really wanted to do. But then it was like, well, theater is even worse. Like at least you can go and get a degree and then you can teach piano and like do that. Like because that was the option. That was the only option that was available to me and was just drilled in my head, right? And so there's that part of it. Um, and then finding composition and improvisation in school was this other thing that was like magical, that was kind of like a secret hobby that like I could never be successful in this. I could never make a living out of this because one, it's just like super obscure, but then also it's like no, like this here is not gonna make it. Like so the levels of like internal internalized like racism and internalized like uh censorship, or like of my own potential, and like of what like I wanted, or like what I even think was available to me, was just so deeply entrenched and so deeply felt. Like, and that's like even before any of this, like, oh my god, like, your piano training and like virtuosity, like that's another huge like other thing to like live by, right? The school that I went to, everybody needed to play an instrument. And I think this was echoed early, like I'm just echoing things I'm hearing from earlier too, right? Of going like, okay, like I guess if I'm not good enough as a classical player, then like I found new music as though that's like a way out. And then of course, like, it was also said, it's like there's like a certain level of like virtuosity you also gotta hit. And so like I guess like I can't hit that, so I'll make my own work, because then like at least I'm the best at it because that's mine. So and it's true, like, hey man, like I can only be the best me, so like yay. um so that part was the start of like getting out of these little like layers of yeah, like internalized racism, that I think it's like societal, but also it is like through the systems that I was engaging with, right? And also there was a huge part in me that like really wanted to be good. Like, I just really wanted to like be accepted. I so wanted it. So like, I'm not gonna like boo-boo the whole thing and be like, oh my God, like I was so oppressed. Like, yeah. And like, if I could have like succeeded, like sign me up, you know? Um, I was listening to this little like video of like Alan Watts talking about meditation and how he was saying like meditation is like equivalent to like playing music or dancing, you know, you do it for the sake of it. And I just like totally kicked me out. I was like, I have what? Like, that's just not my relationship with like playing, because I think about like playing music, it's like in music school or like, you know, performing on the piano, and I'm just like already sweating bullets, and I like so all of a sudden have no more nails because I like just chew them all off, you know. And he gave an example of like, oh, you know, it what is playing music? Playing music is, it's not like who can like play the fastest or who can play the most correct, because if that were the case, then like the robot would be the best musician. And I was like, but kind of though, like that's kind of it, ain't it? So like that kind of got me thinking again about like, yeah, exactly this question of like my relationship to like the object itself, like how much of it is like associated with the object, and then how much of it is like associated with pedagogy, and like how much of it is just like internalized, and like how tied are these like feedback loops. And I think like I said before, like getting out of that was just like, okay, I guess like I'll just make my own work, because like I can't quite like really fit into like one thing or another thing. And like, to be completely honest, like I really just wanted to be a theater artist. I just wanted to go to theater school, and I like kind of took a detour to get there, and I'm very happy to be making theater work now, and all, and different kinds of performances, and I'm very thankful for the training that I have to help me and to like lend me this other skill, because like every game is, it's like, it's, you know, you kind of have to make it your own, or that's what I found anyhow. um and in this way of like thinking about instrument too, like yes, there was this object of like the piano being my instrument, but I think like I've always thought about like sound or like movement or like light or like scenography as like just like equal players within the things that I make. So the piano is, it's like part of my instrument, rather than it's the instrument that I use or practice. Um, and it's interesting because like now I do performances and I'm largely unseen, and my instrument is like very specific to like the exact show that I'm doing, because they look like, you know, they have like knobs and faders and buttons, and the funny thing is like now, like I have to I do a lot of talkbacks where I have to like explain why that's an instrument. And so this, even this word, or like this concept of like what is like an appropriate instrument and what is it supposed to look like, is an, yeah, like it's troubling, you know, in the same kind of way that like it was troubling for me to think about like being a successful uh pianist, or like thinking about being a successful composer. Um, and I wrote down some other notes here. Oh yeah, somebody earlier was saying about, I think it was Leslie, you were talking about like listening, and I think that's like a big part. Like I remember the experience of like just, you know, like performing, and I think this is probably like felt like for like probably a lot of people, not just like people of color, not just BIPOC folks, but like, you know, when you're like in the zone and you're performing, like the things that you're thinking and the things that you're listening, or like the ways that you listen, it's almost like not yours, right? Like you're like really like in the music, you're like remembering all the notes that you've written down, scribble around, erased, and like it's almost like or my experience of it is just like I'm doing a thing, but like I think this like word of like conduit, it's like I'm just being used to produce all these sounds and all these like feelings and all these like concepts, rather than like the feeling that I have when I'm like making my own work, or like catering my own processes, or like making my own instruments. That it's just then I am my own conduit for my own thoughts. And I was just reading this book. Do you guys know about this? Hungry Listening. It's so good. Everybody go and get it right now. It's like $20 or something. Seriously. It's so great because it talks about how like when we're thinking about decolonizing concert music, we're thinking about like decolonizing these practices, but like what does it actually mean? Like we have to be prepared to pull apart all the formal things that we take for granted. We have to like like what Melody was saying, like and Gabe, like everyone was saying, like who's in the room and how do we like be more aware of that? How are we gonna like try and let go of like the smallest fundamental blocks that we know as like a constant? So I guess just to wrap it back around to this like relationship with like the object, I think it's less so about the object for me, but like about like the concept, or like what it represents. And it's still like, I don't know, I like right now as I'm saying this thing, like I am quite nervous, and I feel like I'm like a bad kid, just like tattletelling a little bit, but like it also like there's a kind of like self-righteousness in it that I feel as well.
Thanks. um, yeah, so everybody here has kind of like branched off and started doing these things, their way, in one way or another. And some of us have already talked about this a little bit. So I'm going to try and combine these two questions together. What were some of the key moments that you realized, either like that you had to do this, like whether it was spawned by necessity, material necessity, other kinds of necessity, moments where I just kind of realized he's like, I really have to go this my own way. And then I don't know, I'm going to merge these two questions together. I may just be asking two separate questions. And then the second question is that everybody's practice here is so different, and also that you've kind of interacted with other disciplines as well. And so what were some of the things that you had to unlearn when you started to engage with these other disciplines that you thought that you kind of took into the room with you from your training as well? And how did you come to realize that those things were dangerous? I think I just asked like 5 questions. I'm sorry. Yes. So I'll have Gabe go first.
Yeah, I have lots to say about the first one, so I might just stay on that. I think I have 2 answers to those moments where that kind of act as a catalyst, or like a little flag, like you need to do something differently. Because I'm bicultural and always like every time we talk about that, it's like oh, we're the only ones. Like I want to acknowledge that these identities are much more part of the social fabric than they were when that I thought that they were when I was growing up, if that makes sense. Because what happens is that you have a bit of this like culture orphan thing, so you don't know that there's other people that are neither that or that or that or that. All that to say that the theme of imaginary culture and imaginary folklore has been pretty like important in my work as a composer performer, as a singer. But first it was as a composer, and I think I could get away with some stuff exploring that concept for when composing for other ensembles, but there's so many limitations in instrumental writing. It's just, yeah, what are the instruments? And like, yeah, you can like, you know, it still sounds like a chamber orchestra. It still sounds like, you know, but then with voice, it's like, if you want to, I'm on a hidden agenda of it's not so hidden, but of really questioning what's a standard voice in composition and new music. And it's just yeah, lyrical singing, or singing that comes from that that lineage. I mean, it has its things. Like, I don't want to dismiss it, of course, but like, there's enough people that worship it that I can just speak bluntly, if that makes sense. But there's so much value to the human voice that that is available, and that is that can sound very true also to, and you just have to look into pop and see that step. So it's not even like, and I say pop in a very large sense, you know. So for me, seeing the sounds I wanted to hear that weren't coming from training in Western classical music, and hearing those sounds go through the filter of someone that's pretending they don't have that training, it can work, but it's better if I do it myself. Like, it's just as simple as that. I can't, like, there's just too much to unpack, and it's just not how they're going to sing it. So I don't want to make it all about a performer's inability. It's like their body, it's their white bodies, it's their, so like the way that they carry their bodies, it's their how they stand, how they're placed to do these things. All these things have so much information. It's information that we take for granted as just being like a standard of either technique or of concert protocol of some sort. So for me, the first time, that's what led me to do Anthropologie imaginaire, and which is my piece that I think most people know about. And I knew that was my instinct. It was like, I need to explore this concept, but do it myself, and be the body, and be the voice, and be the brain. The second thing circles back a little bit to questions of audience. And I started to investigate some feelings of discomfort or guilt that I had. Say I have a friend, like, I'm going to make a friend up, but they might exist, who's, you know, South Asian, living in my city, and they're like interested in, they're creative, or they're interested in arts, and they might not. And then like, oh, I have a concert, but like, I'm not sure I want them to be there. I'm not sure I want them to know that I'm doing this music with these important looking people introducing it, and all of what comes around. And I'm talking here about an event that we can pretend is a contemporary music concert. So I was like, like, why? Like, that sucks. Like, that I'm blocking. There's things that are blocking me from wanting to achieve the things I actually want. And what I want is to engage people that I want to. So that's what led me to do my whole drag project, which is, my drag persona is based on South Asianness and queerness, which is a very tough intersection for me. And I've I've never yeah, it was like, you know, that there's other people like that, but be going into those scenes or networks as just myself was not gonna happen. So through drag, and I kept my drag thing secret for like a good year and a half, I think, or like relatively, you know. But it was just like, I think in March, it was during the pandemic, that I was like, okay, I'm just going to post about it on Facebook and get it over with. And the reason for that was like, I wanted to keep it quite separate. I wanted to see, okay, as an artist, can I be interesting in myself and engage other people? And the answer is always yes. You know, there's always people interested in seeing what you're doing, and you can do it weird, and you can do it contemporary, and you can, you know, you don't have to lean into being so mainstream that everybody understands me. I've never been interested in being universally appealing. I don't know how people deal with so much, you know, visibility, right? I want just to, and I've enjoyed the marginality of the new music scene a lot. You know, I think it's something we kind of enjoy. I think if we wanted to be more famous, I don't know if that's what we'd be doing. You know, because some people are driven by fame. So I'm really interested in specific audiences and acknowledging that there's not a universal audience, but you can't get to all your potential audience by staying within the confines and the rules and the expectations of the new music scene. So those are the two moments where I'm like investigating my guilt at keeping my composer practice kind of secret, and having lots of shame about it, and shame about successes too. Like, and it's odd. You just want to make art and share and inspire. I think that's inspiring people is a big part of my motivation, I guess, as selfish and because it's not just selfish. I'm looking for the other word, but yeah, kind of in a loving kind of way of like a community building kind of way. Like, you want to do things, and I want to be inspired too, right?
Thanks. Melody, maybe.
Yeah, I think key moments and turning points is something I alluded went over a bit in my previous comments around recognizing that some of the set out paths for a violin and then viola performance students weren't realistic, and it was a lot of uphill battles, because definitely in high school, like, even like, my teachers like, why you want to go into music, like, why are you going to do it, like, it was funny how even like a high school teacher would be like, what are you gonna do with that? Teach? Like, saying like it's like the worst thing in the world, like, which comes a little bit differently when it's coming from someone else that's already working in education. I love teaching, but yeah, I think for me it was opening up the new realms of possibilities, and even though it's meant to be kind of the prestige thing, I knew that I didn't want an orchestral job anyways, because I wanted to have that degree of creative control. But then for a long time my calibrations were being interested in like contemporary chamber music performance, which is something I still really enjoy, and then after my shoulder injury I ended up writing the chamber music instead of performing it. Try to do a bit of both. But for me, I think working with like such like a rigid Western technical framework, and really wanting to have my music still be of service to like a really vibrant and multidisciplinary Indigenous performing and creative arts community, I think a turning point for me was being able to explore notions of storytelling and working within an oral tradition, even though I'm working in a very Western framework. It's how can I leverage these to be of these tools to be of service, to amplify and strengthen stories that my peers and colleagues are art telling. So right now I'm working on a film score for an indigenous filmmaker from the West Coast. Previously, like some of my work has been score work for indigenous theater, and then I'm able to kind of turn around and share these stories within my own context as a musician in some of my solo performances as well, and it gives me something to talk about on stage of like, this is the story that this music is trying to tell, and because otherwise I definitely get pigeonholed. I mean, I've lost track of the amount of people like, I hear so much powwow music in your compositions. I'm like, really? Like that was a Shostakovich quotation, like, so I'm not sure what you're getting powwow out of that, but I think those spaces for collaboration have been really rich, and I think also just a note too that I have to kind of fundamentally recalibrate the theoretical frameworks that we're working in. Like this whole series is decolonization, but unless we plan on returning land back, like this is not decolonization. At the end of the day, whatever I do with my viola, as much as I deeply value to be of service to my indigenous communities, is not going to decolonize anything. It is there as much as it is to amplify indigenous stories as it is for my own self-indulgence. I play it because I like it, I play it because I enjoy it, I play it because it gives me value, and because of my own internal ethics, I try to find like-minded colleagues to work with, because I believe that art has value. But I've also don't believe, if we say decolonize, we're using the wrong, it's the wrong word. So we can talk about diversity, we can talk about deconstructing, but my classical music or my new music is not going to give my family clean drinking water at the end of the day. So I think we do ourselves a disservice when we're leveraging these terms in a way when like my viola just won't bring back drinking water. Like that's not how it works. I'm not going to get my land back. Ultimately, it's about diversity. It's about sharing different stories. But I know that when I want to talk about decolonization, then that is a different conversation than when I'm having one about music and interdisciplinary arts.
Thank you so much for that. Nancy.
Sure. Remy, do you mind just repeating? Oh, he's gone.
I'm back. Sorry.
Okay. Can you just like remind me what your first two questions were?
Yes.
It's been a while. Yeah.
Yeah, some of those, like, I feel like you did talk about this, some of these moments of realization that spawned from either necessity or that where you turned and kind of started going down the path that you're on now. But maybe for you, I think it would be interesting to focus on having worked in such multidisciplinary settings. What are some of these ideas that you brought into the room that were dangerous from our training, from our music training, right? That we realized can become dangerous over time, and then we had to unlearn in these other settings and contexts.
Yeah. I mean, that's super tricky. I think that's like a super tricky question, because I feel like my pivot, or like my way into like theater and making performance, was kind of like celebrated. Like I received so much support and love, like in that transition, like I never experienced in like, another way, like in music school. So so many of like those like kind of method, the methods of thinking, or like the formal ways that we think about like music, I used it as like almost like a transferable way of like looking at performance, and people loved it, but like I'm not bringing in like the ways in which, you know you're like grueling, your actors, or asking for like virtuosity, and this, like however that translates, or like I'm not bringing those things into the room, just because like those are like not fun for anyone's like psyche or body. So why would I do that? So I just never, I kind of like picked and chose like which thing I wanted to bring into the room. And what I would say, like, I guess within that transfer, I think a lot about like culturally, personally, but also within my own work about the third thing, which kind of it's not like, and like the third thing in like a philosophical way, like it's not the first thing, it's not the second thing, it's like when those two things are like put together, it like equals, or it like produces another thing, like an emergent thing. um and that's kind of what I've been really looking forward to in the work that I make, and in the connections that I make, and also in the kinds of like new practices, or like even maybe not even a practice, but just like new ways of thinking and working, interdisciplinarily, but also like between cultures, um, and like just to and I think that came actually from like my composition teachers, Peter Hatch and Linda Catlin Smith, right? Like those folks, like they just really encouraged. They were like, you're onto a thing. It's a different thing than what we're doing here, and like you should go to this other school and like do that thing there, you know. So that was like the best advice, really, was just like, in a way, it was like, we can't help you here. You got to go somewhere else. But that's also like, there's like, such value in that kind of honesty, and that kind of like support. um so I think like I've just been really obsessed with this idea of the third, um which is what I think about as like a pick and choose of like what I want from different kinds of practices, right? I think like going from new music to theater, or like new music to like a multidisciplinary thing, like I think there's like a kind of maybe soft connotation that like that's the answer, or like it somehow is like better, or like now we've like kind of fixed some of the problems, but it's not. In my experience, it's like, like I'm just inheriting also other like disciplinary flaws as well, right? You know, I like in performance making and in theater, like there's like this really prevalent conversation for decades now about like, flattening the hierarchy, and like why do we need to talk about that? It's because like there's such a huge mantle of it, right? And so like just thinking about that and going like, oh, in what ways like am I already like experiencing it, and then like in what ways can I just like mitigate that practice by just not even giving it room in the culture and the room that I'm trying to cultivate. So I think like my pivot was a way for me to like really think very carefully of like what I bring in from like the things I've learned through my music training. And that has been like fruitful in some ways of like, talking about form and rhythm, to a bunch of like actors. Super fun, super great. And I just kind of left the rest that like hurts.
Thanks. Leslie.
So the key moments. I would say that one of the things I wasn't expecting in working in the game was the amount of still like elitism within the game there was, and how even though you are operating as a, let's say like an orchestra, and you're all on the stage together and you're all doing this thing together, that it feels still like a dictatorship, and there's still quite a bit of hierarchy within it, and elitism, and preserving of that elitism within the group. And that often has to do with money and how much people are paid, which I know is like a tricky, very triggering thing when you're an artist, to talk about like money and the value of what you're doing. And we identify, like I personally identify quite a lot with the instrument and what we're doing, and you try to like put yourself out there with your art, and if equating it with money is very tricky. I won't even try to go any further than that on that. So I guess I was a bit shocked at some of what was being held in place, and I guess too, I also noticed I was not getting I didn't have any creative agency, and for me that wasn't enough. And I found the environment of playing in an orchestra quite tiring for reasons like that, like lots of political reasons that surprised me again in the organization. So the last time that I felt really creative and empowered was in trying to do this multidisciplinary show called Speculation, that's going to be at Theatre Passe Muraille, COVID government pending allowed, at the beginning of March. But this show, so I was a bit sort of repelled from certain parts of like the way that structure and organization works, and also really wanting to go towards creating something and having full agency, and thinking about who's in the room and how do I welcome them into the room, and why aren't they in the room. And so I would say that I felt a little bit pushed and a little bit drawn out, as sort of that first maybe moment when I kind of realized that as much as I had invested quite a lot of time and energy and resource into going towards this thing, it really wasn't working out. So it's led to more what I'm doing now, which I feel like leads to your other question about what I had to kind of unlearn. And I think everyone's kind of touched on this. I think, like one thing that a lot of the training feels like you're trying to be the best vehicle you can for someone else's composition, and you're trying to be the most, you put yourself a bit in there so you're not like the total robot, but not too much too, like you're trying to be this like open vehicle. And my first show, which uses Beethoven and John Cage, for example, and it took a professional grant writer to sort of keep asking me, like, why are you doing this actually, for me to sort of realize I had tried to keep my own personal story out of it because I felt like nobody cared, and like it doesn't matter, like it's all about the music. This is like the music is enough, which I think, if I can take it right to like the current moment right now with this kind of slightly dangerous, some stories I'm hearing a little bit that really worry me about, like, we must go on right now, even in the pandemic, and like, all of people really kind of pushing projects, even though maybe people involved are not comfortable because we're in a pandemic. So maybe you'd want to like consider how people are feeling before you like, oh my God, my project must go on. This kind of like project before the people, I'm hearing a little bit of that, and unfortunately those projects tend to be led by white people. So I guess like, I suppose like something else that kind of comes to mind too when we're talking about like representation, or for example, like having a diverse program, and that's simply not enough. And I think it's easy for people to sort of say like, look at our numbers, but honestly, like when you are the marginalized person, you can feel when you're being respected and considered. If you just show me a number, but look, you were included, like it's not, and this is sort of like a soft thing that's like, that I think is, if you've never been on this side of it, if you're white, you're just not going to know what this feeling is. So you're just going to have to listen. You're just going to have to know that you're doing this on like, you know, on sort of on the scale of like being marginalized, you know, if we're going to talk about like the extreme of like George Floyd to sort of like all the microaggressions that can happen that are so hard, like are so shocking to me, even in the moment, because I'm not looking for them. I'm not looking to be microaggressed. I'm not looking to be ignored. So I get really surprised by it. And it's very difficult to call out in the moment, and such emotional labor to call out in the moment. And at the moment, right now, you know, everyone wants to be working. Everyone wants to do these performances. So it's hard to speak up if you're not comfortable. Pandemic aside, whatever aside, it's very hard to speak out. Everyone feels like, you know, I think the scarcity thing is like, it's around. And so, of course, you're not going to, you want to work, you need, you know, like we live in capitalism, so that's it. But I guess, you know, it's not enough. I can feel if you respect me or consider me. If you, it doesn't, you can tell me, but that it's not, it's not, that's not the thing, is that we can feel it if you are, you know, actually taking in the, that we are, you know, not lesser than or weird or, you know, all of these like, you know, backhanded sort of vague comments of keeping us out. So I suppose I really took a long route around, but I guess I suppose that's a little bit connected to sort of keeping myself small, keeping myself behind the like the music that's going to be enough for everyone. But it's, for me personally, I think I'm realizing that particularly right now, it's not enough. I care about who is in the audience. I think about very much what they leave with, and they can only leave if they got there. And if they don't feel like they are included or cared about or reached out to for all of the historical things, then, you know, then it's all for naught. So I'll stop there.
Oh, sorry, I'm just getting a, thank you. I'm getting a message from, Julia, maybe I'm gonna ask one more question and then we'll do questions to the audience next. Okay, which question do I pick? Because you're starting to practice in all these different ways, what do you want to see from either these institutions, organizations, big or small? How do they engage you, and how do they give up ground for you to have space to make these things that you think are important, as opposed to, say, having to be forced through a funnel of something where you have to do what they expect you to do? I'm gonna have this one open a little bit because have to keep an eye on time.
I think that's like kind of an impossible question, you know, like, because I personally don't know. I don't know if anyone knows, because I feel like if we did know, like, it would be happening. Like one of my questions that I always am pondering is like, what are the like actionable changes that we can commit to, you know, like small steps even, right? And it's just so hard to try to, yeah, like imagine something I feel like that has never happened before. And like don't even know exactly like the routes there. Like I can kind of see like a couple of steps, or maybe like the end couple of steps, but the middle chunk, it's like you know, like, and like this is like a really good example of like a step, right? You know, and I think like all of us on this panel have done panels like this, right? I'm interested in like what the next step is beyond just like talking about it and hearing about it. And I don't know. And I think it has just like real stakes, right? It's like someone's got to give up some power, someone's got to give up some money and not ask questions. That's a hard thing. That's a hard thing. And that's like fucking really sorry. That's really rude, right? Like to think about, and because like like, you know, like Leslie was saying, like we live in capitalism. So those are some things that I can think about. And it's not to say like, oh, someone's got it hurt, but it's just like, well, you know, like what are these ways, right? Because like having just produced, you know, shows and stuff, it's like I'm so grateful that like my shows have been like co-produced, and like I have found like really generous partners, but it is hard when, you know, you actually have to like put the money in, or like you actually have to do the work. And I kind of resent the question a little bit, just not because it's asked from you, Remy, but it's just like, just because it's asked of me, like, or of any of us, because it's like, why do I, like, I don't know, like I didn't just get a memo to like be like, okay, now we have this problem, now we need to like figure it out. It's like, no, like I don't know, it's hard. But like I would hope that like the end few steps that we can all try and envision are like in the same direction, and hopefully are the same. And we can kind of like just wiggle our way through. But to that end, I will just like offer maybe like as you know, maybe a question to the other panelists too, of like, what do you think are like actionable small acts of like actions that we can personally take, but also like of institutions. I'm just asking this question because I'm really aware too that like institutional changes and systemic changes are slow, and they're often like kind of invisible until it's like completely set. And also, yeah, like I'm feeling, and I feel for, you know, people who have to answer these questions, because it's like, you know, people are looking to you. So any way you cut it, it's just an impossible, kind of unfair question.
Can I jump in? Like my first, like, I don't know, this pandemic is crazy, because I think my level of I don't want to say patience, or just, I can't just stop caring about lots of stuff. Like if you asked me, why is it important to change the Canadian Music Center, I don't care. Many institutions, I don't care. If they can't prove their relevancy today, well, yeah, like I don't know. It's not like an attack. It's just, I'd be happy if they found a way. But I think there's also I'm kind of, lots of stuff that you said, Nancy, was moments where I wanted to kind of like sit, like it just triggered so many thoughts. I'm gonna be a bit rambly. I think also we have to trust artists. We have to trust that you've mentioned at some part like the middle part is missing. But the thing is that the middle part, say between our work and audiences, are these institutions. So that's why I think lots of artists are maybe impatient, or taking matters into their own hands, or transforming what they like. And I think I'm very happy and proud to be in this panel with all of you, including Remy, because that's kind of what's happening. So the middle, I don't know, is there a non-gendered way of saying middleman? But that bridge between our work and who we're going to engage sometimes is something we want to also control a little bit. And I've had to compromise so much as a composer that if you ask like how are ways for chamber orchestras or string quartets or like to stay like relevant or to stay uh like to be, I don't know, it's like figure it out or step away, or like all that money that you're getting to play like a wood quintet, even worse, like so, like there's so much money there, there's so much, and there's so many artists that have a lot to say, that have like the most unique perspectives, and we're getting in this world where like there's so many perspectives to hear. Because I think, and thank you also Melody for saying these words earlier about like we're not, I really am steering away from saying like my work is decolonizing. It's something that, and Juliet posted an article that I also think we have to read. But the thing is, the words I like to use are like decentering, diversifying the points of view, and challenging what is colonial or coloniality in its in attitudes also, and in who's holding the power. So arts can do that. We can do it as artists.
Thank you. I'm going to, I think we're out of time for the questions here that I'm asking. And so maybe I can, in our preliminary discussion that we had in December, just to refresh the audience a bit, we expressed the desire to ask some questions towards the audience who is participating. So I will, making this time now to do that, allow the panelists to do that. So maybe Leslie, you can go first.
Sure. My question is, what's the last thing you learned about your role in upholding white supremacist structures, and how did you learn it? And my follow-up question to that is, what do you do with that information now?
Melody?
Yes.
My question to the audience is, I believe that the elephant in the room, as we have all these decolonizing and diversity discussions, and I'm a participant in these, I get asked to be on these panels fairly regularly, is I have never even seen a Black person in the room, let alone invited to any of these discussions. So in the midst of a global discussion on anti-Black racism that has gone throughout the arts industry, every other discipline is having these discussions and making space for Black artists. Like, what are we doing that even when we're trying to be diverse and accommodate Indigenous and non-Black people of color, like, why can we not, as a community, actually meaningfully engage with Black artists?
Gabrielle?
My question is pretty simple. Is who's in your audience? What do they look like? Where are they coming from? What's their education level? What's the color of their skin? What's their gender? Is it a cisgender? Mostly, like, and then why? Like, or what makes it that way, and to really think about it. And I don't know that it begs for an answer, but it might trigger some sort of process and processes are important.
Nancy?
I kind of asked my question a little bit earlier. I guess I will frame it again here. Like what are some like actionable things that one can do to foster or implement a wider conversation, but also like to widen the scope of performance practice within the new music world. And I think like a simpler way of putting it maybe is just like what in your mind, or like what is the capacity of new music, like how far can that term stretch, and that practice stretch to encompass, let's say like all of our practices as an example, and much more.
Thanks. I have a question. My question is that if, especially in this conversation that we've acknowledged that conservatories and pedagogy continue to uphold these kind of classist elitist ideals, especially when it comes to music and how musicians come to enter the community through these places. What are active ways that organizations in the community can turn against them if they don't change and bypass them completely? What may that mean to try to create new channels to allow younger artists or new people to enter our community that are currently cannot enter?
So I'm just going to say very briefly, thank you so much to everyone for sharing so honestly your work, your thoughts, offering us reflection, and also challenging us, those who have responsibility in the community to, we were talking about what are the actionable changes. So that is a really difficult next step, but certainly it is about shifting where resources are